Well, today I'm speaking with Dr. Phil Lorne, who is Australia's leading ecological economist, and he teaches occasionally at the University of Adelaide. And Phil, thanks for joining us.
No worries. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and the students have so far in the 3 weeks of the course have learned a lot about MMT and the financial situation of governments and the role of taxes in a system where the government isn't financially constrained. And we've also talked a bit about climate change and the relevance of MMT to climate change. So what can you tell us about your work and how MMT fits into that big issue of ecological challenges, etc.?
Okay. Well, I think modern monetary theory is the key to a green transition. It's as simple as that. And I think in relation to a green transition, there are two aspects to focus on. There is the demand side and the supply side. Governments, as Bill just mentioned, current issuing central governments need to tax the non-government sector, of course, not to finance their spending, but to make resource room, so that they can spend together with the non-government sector in a way that's not inflationary. Well, if a government has to tax the non-government sector, then it can think creatively about how it can tax the non-government sector. Now, of course, one important way to tax the non-government sector is to tax it in such a way as to redistribute income. So the equity of the distribution of income is important. But from an environmental point of view, and to help the green transition process, it's important that governments tax things that have an undesirable impact upon the natural environment. And of course, we're talking about things like resource depletion, pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. So governments can impose taxes in a way that can alter people's consumption behaviour, so that they can move their consumption patterns away from resource intensive, pollution intensive, greenhouse gas intensive goods and services towards those that have lower impact. So that's an important thing about taxation, which MMT can play a role in encouraging and promoting. But of course, it's one thing to alter people's consumption behaviour and demand patterns. The change in the demand, of course, needs to be supplied. And if we're talking about a green transition, a lot of the goods and the infrastructure that will be required to meet those changing demand patterns, we'll be talking about infrastructure. And we're not just talking about individual goods and services that you might have in your household. We're talking about infrastructure. And one of the things about infrastructure is that it tends to have public goods characteristics. Now, I won't go into any great detail as to what public goods are. I'll just point out that a lot of people do think that because traditionally governments provide public goods, that's the reason why they're called public goods. It's not the reason why they're called public goods. It's the characteristic features of the goods that makes them public goods. Now, I won't go into any great detail as to what public goods are, but even mainstream economics recognises that it's very difficult, if you're supplying public goods, to supply them profitably. It's very difficult to earn the revenue necessary to make profits. Well, the private sector could still provide public goods, but they'd make losses, and the private sector can't sustain losses. So if we need this infrastructure, this change in infrastructure to meet this changing demand to help with this green transition, then governments have to step in to provide this infrastructure in the same way they probably stepped in after World War II and built the roads, the hospitals and schools and so forth. Now, they still need to do those sorts of things, but we need to retrofit the global economy and national economies so that the infrastructure, as I said before, is low resource intensive, low pollution intensive, low greenhouse gas intensive. Of course, governments can do that. Currency issuing central governments can do that. They don't have to. They don't have a financing constraint, so they can always access the resources, the real resources, assuming they're available, to build and provide this infrastructure. So that's a key thing about modern monetary theory that standard economics doesn't understand, because the standard economics approach would be that, okay, if governments have to provide this infrastructure, they're going to have to raise the revenue through taxation. And if they can't do that or don't want to do that, then we're going to have to sacrifice something else. We don't need to sacrifice something else unless, of course, resources are fully employed beforehand, but they're not. There are idle resources available for central governments to acquire, to retrofit the economy, and the capacity to finance that transition is no problem for a currency issuing central government. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what I would say is the key role and contribution that MMT can play towards the green transition. It's very important. It's all well and good for environmentalists and ecological economists, being an ecological economist myself, to say, we need to do X, Y, Z. But of course, the question that's always raised is, how is the central government going to pay for it? Well, that's not a problem at all. MMT opens up this policy space for the green transition to go ahead and proceed. There's nothing from a financial perspective that stands in our way. It's only real resources that matter. It may well be that if in undertaking the green transition that we find that there is a shortage of resources, well, then it might become a political decision, not an economic decision. Perhaps people will have to forego their third, fourth, fifth flat screen television set or what have you to undertake a green transition. But that would be a small price to pay if people do have to be taxed a little bit more to free up some of the resources that aren't used to make an extra flat screen TV to provide the infrastructure that's required for the green transition.
Yeah,
so I would summarise it in that way.
Okay, that's great, and thanks very much for your insights. It's been really, really good.
Thanks, Bill, for the opportunity.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.